Jake Morrison wiped down the last table in the corner of stellar dining. The restaurant was quiet now, with only the soft hum of the space station's life support systems filling the air. He looked out the large windows at the stars beyond Luna Station and sighed. 3 years ago, he never thought he would be working as a waiter in space. Back on Earth, Jake had big dreams. He wanted to be an engineer, maybe design spaceships or work on the new colony worlds. But college was expensive, and when his family needed money for his sister Amy's medical bills, Jake dropped out. Now he was 24 years old, serving fancy alien food to rich people and diplomats. The pay was good, though. Luna Station's most expensive restaurant attracted important visitors from across the galaxy. Jake had served meals to human ambassadors, trade delegates, and even a few alien royalty. Most of them barely noticed him. He was just the human who brought their food and filled their glasses. Tomorrow would be different. Jake's boss, Mr. Chun, had called a special meeting that morning. A very important guest was coming to dinner. The Velonian Empire's ruler, Empress. Zarathil would be dining at stellar dining with human officials. This was a big deal. The Velonians controlled 3 star systems and had never been very friendly with humans. Jake spent the morning learning about Velonian culture. They were tall, with pale blue skin and large eyes that could change color based on their mood. They valued strength and perfection above all else. Their society had strict rules about honor and appearance. Jake memorized the proper way to serve them and the foods they preferred. When the evening came, Jake put on his best uniform and checked his appearance in the mirror. His brown hair was neat, his shirt was clean, and his hands were steady. He had served important people before. This would be just another night. The restaurant filled with security guards first. Human and Velonian soldiers took positions around the dining room, and came the diplomats, wearing their finest clothes and serious expressions. Jake and the other waiters stood ready. Empress Zarathil entered the restaurant like a force of nature. She was over 7 feet tall, with skin that seemed to glow in the soft light. Her eyes were a deep purple, and she wore robes that looked like they were made of liquid starlight. Behind her walked several other Velonians, all looking proud and important. Jake noticed someone else enter with the group. A younger Velonian moved differently from the others. Instead of walking, she glided in what looked like a floating chair. The chair was beautiful, made of the same material as the Empress's robes, but it was clearly built to help someone move. The young Velonian was smaller than the others, with lighter blue skin and eyes that shifted between silver and gold. She looked around the restaurant with curiosity, but Jake could see sadness in her expression. While the adults gathered around the main table for their important meeting, she was seated at a smaller table near the edge of the room. Jake's job was to serve water and bread to all the tables. He started with the main table, where the Empress and human ambassadors were already deep in conversation about trade agreements and shipping routes. Their voices were formal and careful. Every word seemed to carry weight. When Jake moved to the smaller table, he found the young Velonian sitting alone. Her floating chair was positioned so she could see the main table, but she seemed forgotten by everyone else. Jake approached with his water pitcher and glasses. "Good evening," Jake said, softly, not wanting to startle her. "Would you like some water?" The young Velonian looked up, surprised. Her eyes shifted to a bright silver, and Jake realized this meant she was curious or interested. "You speak to me?" she asked in accented English. "Of course," Jake replied, filling her glass. "I'm Jake. I'll be taking care of your table tonight." "I am Liravel," she said, and then added quietly, "I am the Empress's daughter." Jake's eyes widened slightly. This was a princess, and she was sitting alone while her mother conducted important business. "It's an honor to meet you, Princess Liravel," he said with a small bow. Laravel's eyes changed to a soft gold color. Jake didn't know what this meant, but she seemed pleased. "You do not stare at my chair," she observed. "Should I?" Jake asked. Genuinely confused, for the first time, Laravel smiled. It was a small smile, but it changed her whole face. Most people do. They think I am broken. Jake thought about his sister Amy back on Earth. She had been born with cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair. He remembered how people would stare at her, or worse, pretend she didn't exist. "You're not broken," he said simply. "You're just different." The princess's eyes brightened to a warm gold. "You have someone like me in your family," she said. It wasn't a question. "My sister Amy," Jake confirmed. "She's probably the strongest person I know." They talked quietly while Jake served bread and took drink orders. Laravel told him about her homeworld, with its purple skies and floating cities. Jake told her about Earth, with its blue oceans and green forests. She was fascinated by his descriptions of rain and snow, weather that didn't exist on her desert planet. "Why are you not at the main table?" Jake asked during a quiet moment. Laravel's eyes dimmed to a darker silver. "My mother must focus on important matters. I am not suitable for such meetings." "Because of your chair?" "Because I am not the daughter she needs," Laravel said softly. "A future Empress must be strong and perfect. I am neither." Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "That's not true. You're talking to me in a language that isn't yours. You know about politics and trade. You ask good questions and listen carefully. Those are all strengths." Laravel stared at him for a long moment. "You are very strange, Jake Morrison." "I get that a lot," Jake replied with a green dot as the evening continued. Jake found himself checking on Laravel's table more often than necessary. She seemed genuinely interested in everything around her, asking questions about the food, the restaurant, and life on Luna Station. Her eyes stayed bright gold most of the time, which Jake decided must be a good thing. The formal dinner at the main table dragged on. The Empress and human ambassadors discussed shipping routes, mining rights, and defensive treaties. Their voices rose and fell with the importance of each topic. Meanwhile, Laravel sat alone, occasionally glancing at her mother, but mostly watching the other diners. Jake noticed how isolated she seemed. The other Velonians in the group ignored her completely, as if she wasn't there. Even the human diplomats didn't acknowledge her presence. She was a princess, but she might as well have been invisible. When Jake brought her dessert, Laravel was listening to the soft music playing in the background. Her fingers moved slightly in rhythm with the melody, and her chair swayed almost imperceptibly. She seemed lost in the sound. "Do you like music?" Jake asked. "Very much," Laravel replied. "We have music on my world, but it is different from this. This has more ... feeling." Jake listened to the gentle waltz playing through the restaurant speakers. It was one of his favorites, a piece that reminded him of dancing with Amy in their living room when they were younger. She would sit in her wheelchair while he moved around her, and they would laugh until their parents told them to quiet down. "It's a waltz," Jake explained. "It's meant for dancing." "Dancing," Laravel repeated the word like it was something magical. "I have heard of this human custom. You've never danced?" Her eyes shifted to a dark blue, which Jake was beginning to understand meant sadness. "My people do not dance. And I cannot move as others do." Jake looked at her floating chair, with its smooth movements and graceful design. Then he looked at the princess, with her bright mind and kind heart. An idea began to form in his mind, crazy and probably dangerous, but suddenly very important. The evening was about to change in ways none of them could imagine. Jake continued serving the other tables, but his mind kept returning to Princess Laravel. She sat alone at her small table, watching the world around her with intelligent eyes, yet treated as if she didn't exist. The more Jake observed the Valonian delegation, the more he understood how different their culture was from human society. The Empress commanded attention wherever she looked. Her voice carried across the room when she spoke, and every Valonian in the group listened carefully too. Her words. But when it came to her daughter, Empress Zarathal's behavior changed. She would glance at Lyraval occasionally, and Jake could see love in those looks, but also something else. Pain, maybe, or embarrassment. The other Valonians were even worse. They acted as if Lyraval wasn't there at all. When she tried to join conversations, they would turn away or change the subject. When she asked questions, they would give short answers and move on quickly. Jake watched this happen several times throughout the evening, and each time he saw Lyraval's eyes dim a little more. During his break, Jake stepped outside the restaurant and called his sister Amy on Earth. The communication delay was annoying, but he needed to hear her voice. "Hey, big brother." Amy's cheerful voice came through the speaker after a few seconds. "How's life among the stars?" "Strange," Jake replied. "I met someone today who reminds me of you." "Another devastatingly charming person in a wheelchair?" Amy joked. "Something like that." "Amy, do you remember when we were kids and people would stare at you?" There was a pause. "Of course I remember." "Why? How did you handle it? The way people treated you like you were broken?" Amy was quiet for a moment. "I had you," she said finally. "You never treated me differently. You saw me as your sister, not as someone to be pitied. That made all the difference." Jake felt a knot in his stomach. What if you hadn't had that? What if everyone around you acted like you were a disappointment? That would have been much harder, Amy admitted. But Jake, you can't save everyone. You can't fix the whole world's problems. "Maybe not the whole world," Jake said, "but maybe I can help one person." When Jake returned to the restaurant, the formal dinner was still going on. The Empress and human ambassadors had moved on to discussing military cooperation. Their voices were serious and occasionally tense. Jake could tell this was important business that would affect millions of people across multiple star systems. But Lyraval was still sitting alone. Jake approached her table with fresh water. "How are you enjoying the evening, Princess?" "Please, just call me Lyra," she said. "And I am enjoying our conversations more than the evening itself. Are you interested in politics?" Jake asked, nodding toward the main table. Lyra's eyes brightened. "Very much. I study the trade agreements between our people and yours. I read about human colonies and Valonian expansion. I think there are many opportunities for cooperation that the adults do not see, such as your people are good at building things that help those who are different. You make devices for the blind, for the deaf, for those who cannot walk. My people have great resources and manufacturing ability. Together, we could help many beings across the galaxy." Jake stared at her. This wasn't the thinking of someone who was broken or useless. This was the thinking of someone who understood complex problems and saw creative solutions. "Have you shared these ideas with your mother?" Lyra's eyes dimmed to dark blue. "She has more important matters to consider. I am not. I am not the heir she needs for the Empire. Why not?" "Look at me," Lyra said, gesturing to her floating chair. "A ruler must be strong. A ruler must be perfect. I am neither of these things." Jake pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. This was probably against protocol, but he didn't care. "Can I tell you something about humans?" Lyra nodded. "We used to think like your people do. We used to hide people who were different, or pretend they didn't exist. But we learned something important. Some of our greatest leaders, our smartest scientists, our most creative artists were people who were different from everyone else. They saw the world in ways others couldn't. But I cannot walk, Lyra said quietly. So what? You can think. You can plan. You can understand complex problems and find solutions. You can learn languages and build relationships with people from other worlds. Jake leaned forward. You can lead. Lyra's eyes shifted through several colors before settling on a bright gold. You really believe this? I know it. The music in the restaurant changed to a softer melody. Jake recognized it as another waltz, slower and more graceful than the previous one. He watched Lyra's fingers move in time with the rhythm, and her chair sway slightly as she listened. You really do love music, he observed. It is one of the few things that makes me feel free, Lyra said. When I listen to music, I can imagine moving the way others do. I can imagine being graceful and beautiful. You are graceful and beautiful, Jake said simply. Lyra's eyes widened. You cannot mean that. I do mean it. Watch how you move with the music. Watch how your chair responds to your thoughts. That's not broken. That's dancing. Lyra looked down at her hands, then at her chair. I never thought of it that way. Would you like to try something? Jake asked, his heart beating faster as the crazy idea from earlier became more real. What do you mean? Jake stood up and held out his hand. Would you like to dance? The question hung in the air between them. Lyra stared at his outstretched hand, then looked around the restaurant. The formal dinner was still going on. Security guards stood at their posts. Other diners were focused on their own conversations. But Jake was asking her to dance. I do not know how, she said. Neither do I, really, Jake admitted. But I danced with my sister Amy when we were kids. She taught me that dancing isn't about moving your legs. It's about moving with the music, about sharing a moment with someone else. Lyra's eyes shifted between silver and gold, showing her uncertainty and hope. What would people think? I don't care what people think, Jake said. Do you want to dance? For a long moment, Lyra looked at him. Then she looked at her mother, deep in conversation with the human ambassadors. She looked at the other Velonians, who were ignoring her as usual. She looked at the other diners, living their lives without paying attention to the lonely princess in the corner. Finally, she looked back at Jake. Double quotes. Yes, she said quietly. I would like to dance. Jake's smile was brighter than the stars outside the window. Then let's dance. He took her hand, and she guided her chair away from the table. The floating chair moved smoothly, responding to her thoughts and subtle movements. Jake had never danced with someone in a hoverchair before, but he had danced with Amy, and the principle was the same. They started slowly, Jake walking alongside her chair as it glided across the floor. Lyra's movements were careful at first, uncertain. But as the music continued, she began to relax. Her chair flowed with the rhythm, turning and spinning in ways that seemed impossible for a piece of technology. You're doing it, Jake said softly. You're dancing. Lyra's eyes were bright gold now, brighter than Jake had seen them all evening. I am dancing, she whispered, wonder in her voice. They moved together around the edge of the restaurant, careful not to disturb the other diners. But Jake could see people beginning to notice. A few heads turned their way. Some of the security guards shifted their positions to keep them in sight. At the main table, one of the human ambassadors glanced over and did a double-take. He nudged his colleague, who looked and frowned. Jake saw them exchange worried looks. But Lyra was smiling now, really smiling, and Jake couldn't bring himself to care about protocol, or politics, or what people might think. This was about a young woman who had been told she was broken, discovering that she was actually beautiful. The music swelled, and they danced on, unaware that they were about to change everything. Jake and Lyra moved together as if they had been dancing for years. Her floating chair responded to every subtle shift of her body, every gentle movement of her hands. What had started as a simple gesture of kindness was becoming something magical. Music filled the space around them, a gentle waltz that seemed to understand their movements. Jake walked beside Lyra's chair, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes spinning around her as she guided the chair in graceful circles. She was no longer the forgotten princess sitting alone in the corner. She was a dancer, elegant and beautiful. "I never knew," Lyra whispered, her eyes bright with joy. "I never knew I could feel like this." Jake squeezed her hand gently. "This is how you should always feel." As they danced, more people began to notice. The quiet conversations at other tables stopped. Waiters paused in their work. Even some of the security guards turned to watch, their expressions shifting from confusion to amazement. At the main table, the formal dinner was still continuing, but Jake could see the human ambassadors glancing their way with growing concern. One of them, a thin man with gray hair, kept looking at his watch and frowning. Another, a woman in a dark blue suit, was whispering urgently to her colleague. The Valonian delegates were also beginning to notice. Their tall forms turned toward the dance floor, and Jake could see their eyes changing color. Some showed curiosity, others confusion, and a few showed what looked like anger. But Lyra was lost in the music and the movement. Her chair flowed like liquid starlight, spinning and gliding with grace that Jake had never seen before. She was smiling, really smiling, and her eyes were the brightest gold he had ever seen. "Look at me," she laughed softly. "I am dancing." "You are beautiful," Jake replied, and meant it completely. The song was reaching its peak, the melody soaring and complex. Jake spun around Lyra's chair one more time, then took both her hands as they moved together in a final graceful turn. For a moment, they were the only two people in the universe, connected by music and understanding and the simple joy of movement. That was when Empress Zarathul stood up. The scrape of her chair against the floor cut through the music like a knife. All conversation in the restaurant stopped instantly. Every eye turned toward the main table, where the Empress stood 7 feet tall, her robes flowing around her like storm clouds. Her eyes were deep purple, darker than Jake had ever seen Valonian eyes before. He didn't know what that color meant, but he could feel the power radiating from her across the room. "Lyravel," the Empress's voice carried easily across the restaurant. It was not loud, but it was absolute. "Come here, now." Jake felt Lyra's hands tighten on his. Her chair stopped moving, and she seemed to shrink in on herself. The joy drained from her face, and her eyes shifted to the dark blue of sadness and fear. "I must go," she whispered. "Wait," Jake said, but she was already guiding her chair toward the main table. The restaurant was completely silent now. The music had stopped, either because someone had turned it off or because Jake could no longer hear it over the pounding on his heart. Every person in the room was watching as the princess moved slowly toward her mother. Jake followed, knowing he was probably making a terrible mistake, but unable to stop himself. He had started this, and he wouldn't let Lyra face the consequences alone. When they reached the main table, Empress Zarathul looked down at her daughter with an expression Jake couldn't read. Her eyes were still that dark purple, but there was something else there too. Pain, maybe, or confusion. "What were you doing?" the Empress asked. "I was dancing, Mother," Lyra said quietly. "Dancing." The Empress spoke the word like it tasted bad. "You were making a spectacle of yourself, of us." One of the human ambassadors, the gray-haired man, stood up quickly. "Your Majesty, we apologize for any inappropriate behavior from our staff. This young man will be disciplined immediately." "No," Jake said, stepping forward. "This wasn't inappropriate. This was beautiful." The silence in the room became even deeper, if that was possible. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the eyes of every person in the restaurant focused on him. He had just contradicted a human ambassador in front of an alien empress. His career was probably over. His life might be over, but he looked at Lyra, sitting small and sad in her chair, and he didn't care. "Your daughter is amazing," Jake continued, his voice stronger now. "She's intelligent, kind, and graceful. She knows more about politics and trade than most adults. She speaks multiple languages and understands complex problems. And yes, she can dance beautifully." Empress Zarathol's eyes began to shift color, moving from purple toward something Jake couldn't identify. "You forget yourself, human. You forget who you are speaking to." "I know exactly who I'm speaking to," Jake replied. "I'm speaking to a mother who has an incredible daughter. A daughter who could be a great leader if anyone bothered to see her potential." The gray-haired ambassador moved toward Jake. "That's enough. Security, please escort this man out." But the security guards hesitated. Jake could see them looking. Between the ambassador, the empress, and the princess, they weren't sure whose orders to follow. "I am not finished," Empress Zarathul said, her voice cutting through the confusion. Everyone froze. "Human, you dare to tell me about my own daughter?" Jake felt fear creep up his spine, but he stood his ground. "I'm telling you what I see, what everyone should see." "And what is that?" "Someone who has been ignored and dismissed. Because she's different. Someone who has been made to feel ashamed of who she is. Someone who has incredible gifts that are being wasted because your people can't see past her chair." The Empress was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but no less powerful. "You think we have failed her?" "I think." "You love her," Jake said. "But I think you don't know how to show it in a way that your culture accepts." Lyra looked up at her mother, then at Jake. Her eyes were shifting between colors rapidly, showing the storm of emotions inside her. "Mother, You will be quiet," the Empress said, but her tone was gentler than before. She looked at Jake. "Again, you work here. You serve food and fill glasses. What could you possibly know about leadership or ruling an empire?" Jake thought about his sister Amy, about all the time she had been underestimated because of her wheelchair. He thought about the strength it took to face each day with dignity when the world saw you as broken. He thought about the intelligence and creativity that bloomed when people were finally given a chance to show what they could do. "I know what I saw tonight," he said. "I saw someone who was graceful and beautiful and happy. I saw someone who could move with music and connect with others. I saw someone who was alive in a way she's never been allowed to be before." The Empress looked at her daughter, who was staring at Jake with wide eyes. Then she looked around the restaurant at all, the people watching them. Finally, she looked back at Jake. "Show me," she said. "What?" "Show me this dance. Show me what you see in my daughter." Jake's heart stopped. "Here? No. Here. Now. In front of everyone." Jake looked at Lyra, who was sitting very still in her chair. Her eyes were silver now, which he had learned meant uncertainty or fear. She was waiting for him to make a choice. He held out his hand to her. "Would you like to dance again?" For a moment, Lyra just looked at him. Then she looked at her mother, at the human ambassadors, at all the people watching them. Finally, she looked back at Jake. "Yes," she said, taking his hand. "I would like to dance." The music started again, soft and gentle. Jake didn't know if someone had turned it back on or if it had never really stopped. He didn't care. All he cared about was the young woman beside him, ready to show the world who she really was. They began to move together, and once again the restaurant fell silent. But this time, it wasn't the silence of shock or embarrassment. This time, it was the silence of wonder. The dance in front of the entire restaurant was different from their first one. This time, everyone was watching. Jake could feel the weight of their attention. the importance of this moment. But Lyra seemed to draw strength from the audience. Rather than fear, her floating chair moved with even more grace than before, spinning and gliding as if it were part of the music itself. Jake matched her movements, walking beside her, spinning around her, their hands connected as they flowed together across the floor. The waltz seemed to last forever and end too soon. When the music stopped, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then slowly, applause began. It started with one person, then another, until the entire restaurant was clapping. Jake saw tears in some people's eyes, smiles on others' faces. Even some of the security guards were applauding. Empress Zara Thul had not moved from her position at the main table. Her eyes were no longer purple, but a soft blue that Jake had never seen before. She was looking at her daughter with an expression of wonder and something that might have been pride. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Lyra's eyes were bright. Gold, brighter than Jake had ever seen them. "Thank you, Mother." The gray-haired ambassador cleared his throat. "While that was moving, we should probably return to our discussions. We have important matters to. The discussions can wait." Empress Zarathul said firmly, "I wish to speak with my daughter, and with this young man." Jake felt his stomach drop. He had no idea what the Empress wanted to say to him, but he doubted it would be good. He had disrupted an important diplomatic dinner, violated protocol, and probably caused an international incident. But as he looked at Lyra, still glowing with happiness from their dance, he realized he didn't regret it. Whatever happened next, she had experienced joy and acceptance. Perhaps for the first time in her life, the Empress requested a private dining room, and soon Jake found himself sitting across from alien royalty, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to maintain his composure. Lyra sat beside her mother, her chair positioned so she could see both of them. "Tell me about your sister," the Empress said without preamble. Jake blinked, surprised by the question. "My sister? You mentioned her earlier, the one like Lyravel." Jake took a deep breath. "Amy is my younger sister. She has cerebral palsy, which means she can't walk. She uses a wheelchair." "And how does your society treat her?" "It's single quotes complicated," Jake said honestly. "Some people stare, some people pity her, some people ignore her. But she's also a teacher now. She works with children who have different abilities. She's married to a wonderful man who loves her exactly. As she is, she has a full life." The Empress's eyes shifted to a lighter blue. "This was not always the case?" "No," Jake admitted. "When we were children, it was harder. People didn't understand. Schools didn't know how to include her. But things changed. We learned that being different doesn't mean being less." "And you believe Lyravel could have such a life?" Jake looked at Lyra, who was listening intently. "I believe she could have. Any life she chooses. She's brilliant, kind, and stronger than she knows. She understands politics and trade better than most adults. She learns languages easily and connects with people from different cultures. Those are exactly the skills a leader needs." "But she cannot walk," the Empress said, and Jake could hear the pain in her voice. "Neither can Amy," Jake replied. "And neither can millions of other people who live full, successful lives. Your daughter doesn't need to walk to be a great leader. She needs to be seen, heard, and valued for who she is." Lyravel spoke for the first time since they had sat down. "Mother, I know I am not what you hoped for in an heir." "Child," the Empress began, but Lyra continued. "I know I bring shame to our family. I know the council questions my ability to rule. But tonight, when I danced with Jake, I felt something I have never felt before. I felt ... worthy." The Empress's eyes were becoming darker blue, which Jake was beginning to understand meant deep emotion. "You have always been worthy, Lyravel. I have failed you by not showing you that. Our culture teaches that physical perfection reflects inner strength, Lyra said. I have always been proof that this is not true. Perhaps, the Empress said slowly, our culture needs to learn new truths. Jake felt hope rising in his chest. Change is possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. Over the next hour, they talked about many things. The Empress asked about human society, about how they had learned to include people with disabilities. Jake told her about laws that required buildings to be accessible, about technologies that helped people with different abilities, about the slow but steady change in attitudes. Lyra shared her own ideas about cooperation between humans and Valonians, about using technology to help people across the galaxy. Jake was amazed by her knowledge and creativity. She truly could be a great leader if given the chance. When they finally returned to the main dining room, the formal dinner was ending. The human ambassadors looked relieved to see them, though Jake could tell they were still worried about the diplomatic implications of the evening's events. We should discuss what happened here tonight, the gray-haired ambassador said carefully. There may be questions about protocol, ... There will be no questions, Empress Zarathul said firmly. What happened here was important. It was necessary. The next few days passed in a blur. Jake returned to his regular duties at the restaurant, but he couldn't stop thinking about Lyra and their conversation with the Empress. He wondered if anything would really change, or if the moment of understanding would fade once the Empress returned to her regular life. Then the news broke. Jake was cleaning tables when his manager, Mr. Chun, burst into the restaurant with a tablet in his hands. Jake, have you seen this? The screen showed a news report from the Valonian homeworld. The headline read, Empress announces historic disability rights initiative. Jake's hands shook as he read the article. Empress Zarathul had announced the creation of the Lyraville Foundation, dedicated to improving the lives of disabled individuals across the Valonian Empire. She had also declared that Princess Lyraville would be taking a more active role in diplomatic affairs, starting with negotiations for new human-Valonian cooperation agreements. But that wasn't all. The article mentioned a video that had been recorded by the restaurant's security cameras. Someone had leaked the footage of Jake and Lyra dancing, and it was spreading across the galactic net. Jake watched the video on Mr. Chan's tablet, seeing himself and Lyra moving together to the soft music. In the recording, he could see what everyone else had seen, not a disabled princess and a human waiter, but two people sharing a moment of pure joy and connection. The video had been viewed millions of times already. Comments poured in from across human space and beyond. Most were positive, praising the beauty of the dance and the message of inclusion. But there were negative comments too, from people who thought Jake had overstepped his bounds or that the princess was being used as a political tool. Jake's personal communication device started beeping with messages from news organizations wanting interviews. Mr. Chun was fielding calls from reporters and diplomats. The quiet waiter who had just wanted to help one person feel less alone had become the center of galactic attention. That evening, Jake received a personal message from Princess Lyraville herself. Thank you, it said simply. You gave me something I never knew I was missing. You gave me hope. Attached to the message was a formal invitation. The Empress was requesting that Jake serve as a cultural advisor for the new Human-Valonian Cooperation Initiative. It would mean leaving his job at the restaurant, traveling to the Valonian homeworld, and working directly with alien royalty. Jake stared at the invitation for a long time. 3 days ago, he had been a waiter trying to pay off his student loans. Now he was being offered a chance to help build bridges between species, to be part of something much bigger than himself. He called Amy that night, despite the communication delay to Earth. I saw the video, Amy said when her face appeared on the screen. Jake, that was beautiful. I'm so proud of you. I might have started something I can't control, Jake said, showing her the invitation. "They want me to be a cultural advisor. Me, a college dropout who serves food for a living." Amy smiled. "You're also the person who saw someone being ignored and decided to do something about it. You're the person who treated an alien princess like she was your sister. Those are exactly the qualifications they need. What if I mess it up? This is diplomacy between entire civilizations." "Then you mess it up," Amy said simply. "But Jake, you've already changed that girl's life. You've already made her feel valued and seen. Whatever else happens, that matters." Jake thought about Lyra sitting alone at her table, watching the world around her but not being part of it. He thought about her eyes lighting up when she realized she could dance. He thought about her ideas for cooperation between their peoples, ideas that were brilliant, but had never been heard because no one thought to listen to her. "I have to try, don't I?" he said. "You have to try," Amy agreed. The next morning, Jake gave Mr. Chun his resignation. His boss was understanding, even excited about the opportunity. "You're going to represent all of us," Mr. Chun said. "Make us proud." Jake packed his few belongings and prepared for a journey that would take him farther from home than he had ever been. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the new human Valonian Cultural Exchange Station, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. The station floated in neutral space between Earth and the Valonian homeworld, a symbol of the growing cooperation between their peoples. Jake still couldn't quite believe how much his life had changed. The scared young man who had served water and bread at stellar dining was now a cultural advisor, helping to shape relationships between civilizations. Some days he felt like he was in over his head, but Princess Lyravel was always there to remind him that the most important changes often came from the simplest actions. Lyra had changed too. She now served as the official Valonian ambassador to the Cultural Exchange Station, and her ideas for cooperation had become the foundation for dozens of new projects. Her hover chair had been upgraded with new technology that combined human engineering with Valonian design, making it even more graceful and responsive. More importantly, she carried herself differently now. The shy, hidden princess was gone, replaced by a confident leader who spoke her mind and commanded respect. Her eyes were bright gold most of the time now, showing the happiness that had become her natural state. "The new group is arriving," Lyra sighed, gliding up beside Jake at the observation window. "Are you ready for this?" Jake smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be." They were about to welcome the first class of the Inclusion Leadership Program, a new initiative that brought together young people from different species who had been overlooked or dismissed because of disabilities or differences. The program would teach them leadership skills, cultural understanding, and the confidence to make changes in their own societies. The idea had come from Lyra, inspired by her own experience of transformation. "If one dance could change my life," she had said, "imagine what proper education and support could do for others." Jake watched as the transport ships docked with the station. Soon, the corridors would be filled with beings from across the galaxy, all of them different in their own ways, all of them ready to learn that their differences were strengths. "Nervous?" Lyra asked, noticing his expression. "A little," Jake admitted. 6 months ago, I was just trying to get through each day. Now we're trying to change how entire civilizations think about ability and worth." "One person at a time," Lyra said, repeating the phrase that had become their motto. "We can't change everyone, but we can show them what's possible." The first students began arriving at the Welcome Center. Jake saw beings he had never encountered before. A young Zephyrian with translucent wings who moved with the help of a mobility device. A crystalline whose natural formations were considered imperfect by her people's standards, and several humans with various disabilities who had applied to the program from colonies across known space. But what struck Jake most was how they looked at each other. There was no pity, no awkwardness, no pretending differences didn't exist. There was curiosity, respect, and the beginning of understanding. These young people had all experienced being underestimated, and they recognized something valuable in each other. "Welcome," Lyra said to the assembled group, her voice carrying easily across the room. "You are here because someone somewhere decided you weren't good enough. Someone decided your differences made you less valuable. We are here to prove them wrong." The program lasted 3 months. Jake and Lyra worked with the students on everything from political science to communication skills, from cultural understanding to project management. But the most important lessons happened in the informal moments, when students shared their stories, supported each other through challenges, and began to see themselves as leaders rather than outcasts. Jake's favorite part of each day was the evening social hour, when students from different species would gather in the common area to talk, play games, and yes, sometimes dance. The station had installed a sound system that could accommodate the musical preferences of dozens of different cultures, and Jake had started informal dance lessons for anyone who was interested, watching a Zephyrian and a human move together to Valonian music, or seeing a group of students from 5 different species create their own hybrid dance style. Jake felt the same joy he'd experienced that first night with Lyra. These moments of connection and celebration were changing how young people thought about themselves and each other. Empress Zaraithil visited the station near the end of the first program session. Jake was nervous about seeing her again, remembering their tense first meeting. But when she arrived, her eyes were the soft blue that meant contentment and pride. "You have done well," she told Jake as they walked through the station together. "Both of you." They paused at the observation window where Jake had stood that morning, watching new arrivals. Now they could see the students working on group projects, their different abilities combining to solve complex problems in ways that none of them could have managed alone. "My daughter has found her purpose," the Empress continued, "and in doing so, she has helped our entire empire find a new understanding of strength. She was always strong," Jake said. "She just needed someone to see it." "As did you," the Empress replied. "You were a waiter with dreams of engineering. Now you are building bridges between worlds. Sometimes the greatest changes come from the most unexpected places." The graduation ceremony for the first class was held in the station's main auditorium. Students presented their capstone projects, innovative solutions to real problems facing their home worlds. A crystalline student had designed new architectural methods that incorporated imperfect crystalline structures for greater stability. The Zephyrian student had developed communication protocols that accounted for different types of sensory processing across species. But the project that moved Jake the most came from a human student named Chris, who had been born without arms. He had created a comprehensive guide for adapting human technology for different physical abilities, complete with designs and implementation strategies. "I learned something here," Chris said during his presentation. "I learned that adaptation isn't about making things normal. It's about making things better for everyone." After the ceremony, Jake and Lyra stood together on the observation deck, once more watching the graduates' ships depart for their home worlds. Each student carried with them not just knowledge and skills, but a new understanding of their own worth and potential. "Do you think it will work?" Jake asked. "Do you think they can really change things back home?" "Some will," Lyra said. "Some will face resistance and setbacks, but they're not alone anymore. They know there are others like them, others who believe in what they're trying to do." As if to prove her point, Jake's communication device chimed. With a message from one of the departing students, the crystalline graduate was already planning to start an inclusion initiative on her home world. Using the station's program as a model, more messages followed throughout the evening. Students sharing their plans, asking for advice, offering to help each other as they worked to implement changes in their own societies. The network of understanding and support that had formed during the program was continuing even as the participants scattered across the galaxy. That night, Jake called Amy on Earth. She had been following news reports about the Cultural Exchange Station and the Inclusion Leadership Program. "I'm proud of you," she said, as she had so many times over the past months. "But I have to ask, do you miss the simple life? Being just a waiter instead of a galactic diplomat?" Jake thought about the question seriously. There were days when the responsibility felt overwhelming, when the complexity of interspecies relations made him long for the straightforward task of serving food and filling glasses. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but Amy, you should see these students. You should see how they support each other, how they come up with solutions that none of us adults thought of. They're going to change the galaxy. And you helped make that possible," Amy said, "one dance at a time." A year later, Jake received an invitation that brought tears to his eyes. Amy was coming to visit the station, along with a group of human disability rights advocates who wanted to see the program for themselves. She would be arriving as part of the second year's opening ceremony. When Amy's transport docked with the station, Jake was waiting at the airlock. He hadn't seen his sister in person since accepting the position, and he had missed her more than he realized. "Look at you," Amy said, as her wheelchair moved smoothly through the station's corridors. "Official galactic diplomat with your own office and everything." "Look at this place," Jake replied. "Amy, we have students from 12 different species. Now, they're working on projects that could help millions of beings across the galaxy." They toured the station together, Amy meeting students and faculty from across known space. Jake watched her talk with a young Villonian who was developing new mobility technologies, saw her laugh with a group of students who were practicing their own version of the dance that had started everything. That evening, the station held its regular social hour in Amy's honor. Students gathered in the common area, and Jake found himself standing with Amy and Lyra, watching young beings from different worlds move together to music from across the galaxy. "You know what I think?" Amy said, watching a particularly graceful dance between a human stud